Thank you all for your participation and engagement. And here to close the conference with some remarks is the head of the ESRB Secretariat, Francesco Mazzaferro. Francesco, please.
It is a tradition for me to close our annual conferences. After 2 fully online meetings, our 8th conference has once again allowed physical attendance. Many of us benefited from the exchanges in the margins of the conference that this has made possible. Many thanks as well to all those who have attended remotely. As usual, the video recordings of this event will be posted on our website for you to revisit or share with others. And this is also an occasion to thank my colleague Connie Lotze and all the colleagues of communication who have been organizing so well for us. This rich event, which owes much to the passion and the inexhaustible energy of my deputy, Thomas Peltonen, who would really merit an applause, as well as to the dedication of Shirley Simons-Nocca, Elena Lanza, Jonathan Rice, Antonio Sanchez, and Beatriz Vegas, has brought together key policymakers and academics. I would like to mention among many of them the chair and the vice chair of the ESRB, President Christine Lagarde, and the Governor Olli Rehn, as well as the chair of the SSM, Professor Claudia Buch. Please let me thank, among the representatives of academia, the chairs and vice chairs of the ESRB Advisory Scientific Committee, Professor Torsten Beck, Steve Cecchetti, and Oriana Pellizzon, as well as many other ASC members who lent their intellectual weight to the panels. A particular thank goes to our international guests from the Bank of International Settlements, the Federal Reserve, and the Financial Stability Institute. The 3 panels allowed us to explore how artificial intelligence interacts with the systemic risk, what vulnerabilities are associated with systemic liquidity, and how we should think of evolving systemic risks, from climate-related disasters and the cyber attacks to geopolitical tensions. Unfortunately, we are now exposed to all of them in parallel. Much of what we have discussed today reflects new objectives of our institutional work. But of course, these do not replace our long-standing objectives. In the period since the last annual conference, we closely followed developments in the residential and commercial real estate. We reflected on banks' vulnerability to deposit runs. We prioritized the monitoring of vulnerabilities in the non-bank financial intermediation and the policies to mitigate them. And we continued to develop our macroprudential policy stance. Several reports published on our website are a testimony of this work. My concluding remarks after the annual conference have always been also an opportunity to share some personal reflection on how the ESRB and its Secretariat have contributed to advancing macroprudential policy in the European Union. These are my views and not necessarily those of the institution. Today, we have dwelt a lot on what has been labeled radical uncertainty by John Kay and Marvin King. The crisis we experienced over the past few years illustrated the importance of these concepts, which reminds us that we cannot manage all the risks we are confronted with on the basis of probabilities. But radical uncertainty is not new. It has dominated our work right from the beginning. In October 2008, only a few weeks after the collapse of Lehman Brothers, the European Commission President José Manuel Barroso, as it was recalled today also by our Vice Chair Olli Rehn, established an expert group to revise the supervisory architecture of our financial system and entrusted the leadership of this group to Jacques de Larosière. At this time, in those days, the financial landscape was changing day by day. Every day there was one bank which was failing, with governments responding with costly interventions to save their banks. Jacques de Larosière presented his group findings to President Barroso on 25th February 2009, well before the Greek sovereign debt crisis started. And in fact, that crisis was not expected, and as a consequence, in the de Larosière report, the ESRB was conceived as a body that should explore medium-term risks to financial stability, but did not have any emergency power to manage a financial crisis. The European co-legislator speedily acted on the report proposals. The European supervisory authorities and the ESRB could start their work at the beginning of 2011. But in the meantime, the Greek sovereign debt crisis had erupted. Shortly after the Commission had tabled its legislative proposals to establish the ESAs and the ESRB, this happened on the 23rd September 2009, so only 2 weeks after, the new elected Greek government revealed the true state of the Greek public finances. By the time the ESRB funding regulation had been published in the official journal in November 2010, the situation in Greece had already necessitated 3 emergency fiscal packages in the country, and the Troika had been established. Irish bond, in the meantime, had also increasingly come under attack, which also led to a request for EU and IMF support. It is in this context of growing macroeconomic and political uncertainty that the inaugural meeting of the General Board took place in the Euro Tower. I have to tell that in these days, of course, the main concern for us was to make sure that the electric light was functioning, that there were sufficient rooms for this. But in the meantime, the world was going down. While the ESRB got ready to work, setting up international bodies and procedures, the financial integration achieved in the economic and monetary union was unraveling. Sovereign assets of several EU countries rapidly lost value, and fears were spreading that EMU could fall apart. It took 1 year and the famous whatever it takes speech of President Draghi to stop that vicious dynamic. These were turbulent times indeed, and today, as we have been to a certain extent discussing just now, we are confronted with other sources of uncertainty and threats, which imply that we cannot rely on the future just being an extrapolation of the past. In recent years, we have experienced a major pandemic, the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, the hybrid threats against the Western democracies. The UK has left the European Union. We have seen the rise of protectionism and increasingly severe weather events linked to climate change. The turbulences of the ESRB early days and of the last few years have one thing in common. Whether they cause a systemic crisis in the financial system of Europe or not depends to a large extent on financial market confidence that Europeans have the strength to stick together in the face of adversity. That is not something that we could put in our warnings and the recommendations, but this is the crucial risk. There will be in the future a combination of adverse events in multiple areas, geopolitics, public health, technologies. Tackling accumulation of these crises will require an increased European cooperation. We were exposed to the radical uncertainty in the sovereign debt crisis. At the time, we decided to deal with it together as Europeans. Today, we are confronted with equally significant challenges. We have elements for a European approach to tackling these challenges with the Letta report on the future of the single market and with the Draghi report on the competitiveness of the EMU. My hope is that the 2 reports will help Europe become more resilient thanks to higher productivity, higher growth, and higher living standards. Macroprudential policy can be confronted with the financial implications of global threats, but it can obviously not prevent them. The macroprudential community that the ESRB brings together can, however, contribute, in cooperation with experts in other areas, to a better understanding of how different scenarios can play out and what role the financial system would play in such scenarios. At the ESRB Secretariat, we will continue to reflect on such a broader range of threats to financial stability and ultimately prosperity and peace. We will do this with a highly motivated community of experts from our member organizations who can count on the dedication of the ESRB Secretariat staff. Beyond the colleagues I've already mentioned, I would like to thank Magnus Andersson, Johanna Battista, Emily Boe, Ralph Jacob, Angel Ivan Moreno Bernal, and Olaf Wicken. To mention all others would be impossible, but I vividly recognize their contributions. So I look forward to our next annual conference, and I hope that by then we can be much more confident in our ability to cope with the challenges of radical uncertainty. With this, I would like to ask Thomas and Shirley if they could join me 1 second on stage, please. And together we are declaring the conference closed. Thank you very much.